The shells screamed overhead like banshees as Captain Lysander Ashworth gripped the bridge rail of HMS Belfast, his knuckles white against the salt-stained metal. June 6, 1944. 0730 hours. Omaha Beach spread before him like a vision from hell, American soldiers pinned down behind the seawall, while German machine guns carved deadly arcs through the morning air. The radio crackled with desperate pleas from the beach. "Naval fire support! For God's sake, we need naval fire support!" But Admiral Ramsey's orders had been crystal clear. Conserve ammunition, withdraw after the initial bombardment, maintain fleet positioning for the next phase. Ashworth watched through his binoculars as young Americans died in the surf, their bodies washing back and forth with each wave. The taste of cordite and salt spray filled his mouth as he made a decision that would court-martial him or make him a hero. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Hartwell whispered urgently, "Admiral Ramsey specifically ordered us to cease fire at 0800. We're already 10 minutes past." Ashworth's jaw tightened as another wave of American soldiers stumbled through the killing field, falling like wheat before the scythe. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Continue firing and face charges of insubordination. Stop firing and watch thousands die. No one aboard HMS Belfast that morning knew that one British naval officer's defiance would reshape the entire Normandy invasion and save more American lives than any other single decision made that day. Lysander Ashworth had never intended to become a rebel. Born in the Yorkshire village of Thirsk in 1908, he was the son of a Methodist minister and a schoolteacher, raised on values of duty, scripture, and unwavering respect for authority. When young Lysander announced at age 16 that he wanted to join the Royal Navy, his parents worried that their gentle, studious son wasn't cut out for military life. They needn't have concerned themselves. Ashworth possessed something far more valuable than physical prowess, an intuitive understanding of how systems worked and when they needed to be broken. At the Royal Naval College, Dartmouth, he excelled not because he was the strongest or the fastest, but because he could see patterns others missed and solutions others ignored. His instructors noted his unconventional tactical thinking and tendency to question established procedures, comments that would follow him throughout his career. But success bred suspicion among his superiors, who valued conformity over creativity. His early assignments were deliberately routine: convoy escort duty, port inspections, administrative roles that seemed designed to dampen his innovative spirit. He spent years watching more connected officers advance while he remained stuck in positions that wasted his talents. The frustration might have broken a lesser man, but Ashworth used the time to study every aspect of naval warfare, from gunnery mathematics to supply logistics to the psychology of command decisions under pressure. He had no idea that soon those instincts would be all that stood between life and annihilation. By 1943, Ashworth found himself assigned to HMS Belfast, a town-class light cruiser that had already distinguished herself in Arctic convoys and the sinking of the German battleship Scharnhorst. The ship's reputation for aggressive action matched her new gunnery officer's reputation for tactical innovation. The crew began to trust their captain's instincts, even when those instincts contradicted standard procedures. But institutional approval was different from crew loyalty. Admiral Ramsey and the other senior commanders planning Operation Overlord valued predictability and coordination above individual initiative. The invasion of Europe would be the largest amphibious operation in history, involving more than 150,000 troops, 5,000 ships, and 11,000 aircraft. Such complexity demanded rigid adherence to predetermined plans. Ashworth's reputation for independent action made him simultaneously valuable and dangerous. His innovative tactics could win battles, but his willingness to deviate from orders could disrupt the intricate choreography that Operation Overlord required. The planning for Operation Overlord had consumed 18 months of meticulous preparation, but Omaha Beach, assigned to the American 1st Infantry Division and 29th Infantry Division, presented the greatest challenge. The beach was dominated by bluffs, rising 100 feet above the waterline, honeycombed with German bunkers, artillery positions, and machine gun nests. Intelligence estimates suggested that a reinforced German regiment defended the sector with interlocking fields of fire that could slaughter thousands of attackers caught in the open. The pre-invasion bombardment was calculated to neutralize these defenses through a precisely timed sequence of air attacks and naval gunfire. Naval gunfire would commence at 0550 hours and continue until 0630 hours, just minutes before the first assault waves hit the beach. HMS Belfast's role was precisely defined: 35 minutes of high-intensity fire against German positions, followed by withdrawal to predetermined positions for fleet reorganization. The orders left no room for interpretation or modification based on battlefield conditions. But as Captain Ashworth would soon discover, the enemy hadn't read the operations manual. At 21:15 hours on June 5th, Eisenhower gave the order that launched Operation Overlord. "Okay, let's go." Those 3 words set in motion the most complex military operation ever attempted. Aboard HMS Belfast, Captain Ashworth reviewed his firing plans one final time. Intelligence reports indicated that German defenses at Omaha Beach were stronger than originally estimated. German artillery had been repositioned to create deadly crossfires that could not be neutralized by the planned bombardment. Ashworth studied the firing coordinates with growing unease. 35 minutes of naval gunfire might devastate empty bunkers, but experienced German defenders would take cover during the bombardment and emerge to slaughter American soldiers as they struggled across the beach. The mathematics were brutal and inescapable. Lieutenant Commander Hartwell knocked on Ashworth's cabin door as the ship approached the transport area. "Sir, the American regimental commanders are requesting extended fire support if their initial assault encounters heavy resistance." Ashworth looked up from his charts with a grim expression. "What did Admiral Ramsey say?" "Negative, sir. Ammunition conservation and fleet positioning take priority over extended bombardment." The 2 officers stared at each other, understanding the implications. Young Americans would die because bureaucratic efficiency mattered more than tactical flexibility. HMS Belfast took her assigned position at 0400 hours, 6 miles offshore. The pre-bombardment air attacks had already begun as heavy bombers struck targets inland, but the bombing was proving less effective than planned. Cloud cover forced many aircraft to drop their payloads on estimated positions rather than visually confirmed targets. As dawn broke, it became clear that the German defensive positions remained largely intact despite the massive air attack. Captain Ashworth raised his binoculars as the first assault waves formed up for their run to the beach. The soldiers looked impossibly young and vulnerable in their flat-bottomed landing craft. Through the gray morning light, he could see the German positions on the bluffs overlooking Omaha Beach, their concrete walls scarred but unbroken by the bombing. Machine gun barrels protruded from firing slits like deadly eyes watching the approaching Americans. The killing field had been prepared with Prussian efficiency, and 35 minutes of naval gunfire would barely scratch its surface. Ashworth's orders were specific and non-negotiable. Commence firing at 0550 hours, cease fire at 0625 hours. But as Ashworth watched the German positions through his binoculars, he realized that following orders would be tantamount to murder. At 0550 hours precisely, HMS Belfast's main armament roared to life. 6-inch shells screamed toward the Norman coast at 2,800 feet per second, each round weighing 112 pounds. The ship shuddered with each salvo as her 8 guns fired in sequence. their muzzle flashes illuminating the bridge in stark white light. The combined firepower was devastating, but Ashworth could see through his binoculars that it was not enough. German positions had been constructed to survive exactly this type of bombardment. Concrete bunkers disappeared in clouds of smoke and debris, only to emerge intact when the dust cleared. As the minutes ticked by, Ashworth's gunnery officer provided regular updates. Dog Green sector, 70% of allocated rounds expended. No observed secondary explosions. The clinical language concealed a terrible reality. The bombardment was following the predetermined plan perfectly while achieving virtually nothing against German defenses. At 0600 hours, the first assault waves were clearly visible approaching the beach. Landing craft moved through the surf in neat formations, their ramps ready to drop soldiers into the killing field that German defenders had prepared. Through his binoculars, Ashworth could see individual faces among the assault troops, young men from small American towns who trusted that their Navy had cleared the way for their advance. The trust was misplaced, and those young men were about to pay for institutional failure with their lives. 0625 hours arrived with the inexorability of a death sentence. Lieutenant Commander Hartwell looked at his captain expectantly, waiting for the order to cease fire as Admiral Ramsey had commanded. But protocol hadn't accounted for what Ashworth could see through his binoculars. The German positions remained active and deadly. Machine gun crews were already moving back to their firing positions as the naval bombardment slackened. The killing field was ready, and American soldiers were walking directly into it with no hope of survival unless something changed immediately. "Sir," Hartwell whispered urgently, "Admiral Ramsey's orders." Ashworth lowered his binoculars and looked at his gunnery officer with eyes that had seen too much death in too many battles. "Load high explosive, all guns. Target the strong points on the eastern bluff." "But, sir, our ammunition allocation—" "Load the bloody guns!" The command cut through the bridge chatter like a blade. Every officer and rating within hearing distance understood that their captain had just crossed a line from which there might be no return. Disobeying direct orders during combat was a court-martial offense that could result in imprisonment or worse. But as the first landing craft approached the beach and German machine guns opened fire, every man aboard HMS Belfast also understood that their captain was the only person willing to do what needed to be done. The 6-inch guns resumed their deadly work with renewed fury. Shell after shell slammed into German positions that were attempting to engage the assault troops. The effect was immediate and dramatic. American soldiers who had been pinned down in the surf began moving forward as German fire slackened. The mathematics of battle were shifting in favor of the attackers, but only because one British naval officer had chosen conscience over compliance. Radio traffic from the beach confirmed what Ashworth could observe through his binoculars. American forces were beginning to establish footholds on the bluffs above Omaha Beach. Naval gunfire is suppressing German positions effectively. Request continued fire support. But the request put HMS Belfast in an impossible position. Admiral Ramsey's orders had been explicit: cease fire at 0625 hours and withdraw. Ashworth had already violated those orders. Every additional minute deepened his insubordination. Yet the alternative was unthinkable. German defenders were already attempting to reoccupy positions that naval gunfire had forced them to abandon. Lieutenant Commander Hartwell approached his captain with obvious reluctance. "Sir, Admiral Ramsey is signaling all units to assume positions according to the operations order." Ashworth understood the implications. Other ships were following orders and withdrawing. HMS Belfast's continued engagement was becoming conspicuous to senior commanders who valued discipline above tactical effectiveness. But surrender was not in Lysander Ashworth's vocabulary. "Signal Admiral Ramsey that HMS Belfast is engaging targets of opportunity in support of assault forces," Ashworth commanded. "All guns continue fire. The unauthorized bombardment continued for another 37 minutes, each shell a defiant act of insubordination that saved American lives while jeopardizing Ashworth's career. HMS Belfast's guns methodically destroyed German strongpoints that standard procedure would have left intact. The cumulative effect transformed the tactical situation at Omaha Beach from hopeless to manageable. At 07:55 hours, a direct order arrived that left no room for interpretation. HMS Belfast will cease fire immediately. Failure to comply will result in immediate relief from command. The message bore Admiral Ramsay's personal authorization and carried the full weight of naval discipline. The bridge fell silent as every officer and rating waited for the decision that would define their captain's legacy. Through the bridge windows, they could see American soldiers advancing steadily up the bluffs above Omaha Beach, their movement protected by the naval gunfire that had defied orders to save their lives. Captain Ashworth's response became legendary among the crew of HMS Belfast. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "we have young Americans dying on that beach who trusted us to clear the way for their advance. I will not abandon them to satisfy administrative convenience." Joe, the unauthorized bombardment continued until 08:45 hours, when the last German strongpoint fell silent. American forces had reached their primary objectives and established defensive positions. The beachhead was secure, and thousands of soldiers were alive because one naval officer had chosen to disobey orders that would have ensured their deaths. The immediate aftermath created ripples throughout the invasion fleet. Admiral Ramsay faced a command crisis that threatened to undermine discipline during the most crucial phase of Operation Overlord. Yet the tactical results were undeniable. American casualties at Omaha Beach were significantly lower than pre-invasion estimates had predicted. Captain Ashworth reported to HMS Ramillies expecting to face immediate charges. Instead, he found Admiral Ramsay studying after-action reports with frustrated admiration. "Lysander, you magnificent bastard, you've created an impossible situation. Your actions yesterday saved thousands of American lives and secured the most difficult objective in the entire invasion. They also constituted the most flagrant case of insubordination I've encountered in 30 years of naval service." The investigation that followed revealed the institutional failures that had made Ashworth's insubordination necessary. Intelligence estimates had underestimated German defensive capabilities. Pre-invasion bombardment schedules had been calculated based on incomplete information. Rather than court-martial proceedings, Admiral Ramsay proposed that Captain Ashworth be quietly transferred to a staff position where his tactical innovations could be studied and incorporated into revised operational procedures. The precedent was dangerous but necessary. The transfer was approved, and Ashworth found himself assigned to the Royal Naval Staff College, where his experiences became the foundation for new doctrine regarding fire support coordination. His unauthorized bombardment was eventually incorporated into standard procedures that gave ship captains greater latitude to respond to battlefield conditions. Letters from surviving American soldiers offered consolation for the emotional burden of unauthorized leadership. Private First Class Eugene Kowalski wrote, "Sir, I don't know your name or your ship, but somebody kept the German guns quiet long enough for us to get off that beach alive. My whole squad owes their lives to whoever had the guts to keep firing when they were supposed to stop." Captain Ashworth retired from the Royal Navy in 1952, his service record a complex mixture of tactical brilliance and institutional nonconformity. He married Elizabeth Hartwell and settled in a cottage near Portsmouth, where they raised 3 grown family members. The man who had defied admirals and saved thousands of lives found contentment in gardening, local church activities, and community volunteer work. His neighbors knew him as a retired naval officer who helped organize annual remembrance services that honored local war dead. None suspected that the quiet gentleman who tended roses had single-handedly altered the outcome of the most important invasion in modern history. The full significance of HMS Belfast's unauthorized bombardment only became apparent decades later, as military historians gained access to German records and American after-action reports. German commanders confirmed the tactical importance of extended bombardment in disrupting their defensive plans. Oberst Heinrich Krause stated, "When the shelling continued far beyond the normal time limit, our entire defensive plan collapsed. We could not serve our guns while under continuous fire from ships that should have withdrawn, according to their own doctrine." American veterans organizations eventually identified HMS Belfast and Captain Ashworth as crucial factors in securing the Omaha Beach beachhead. The veterans of foreign wars sent a delegation to Portsmouth in 1979 to personally thank the retired naval officer. The ceremony was small and private, held in Ashworth's garden with representatives from various American units that had benefited from unauthorized naval gunfire. Captain Ashworth's response to their gratitude was characteristically modest. "I simply did what needed to be done. Any officer in my position would have made the same choice." But the veterans knew better, understanding that institutional pressure would have prevented most commanders from risking court-martial to save strangers. Today, more than 80 years after HMS Belfast's guns fell silent above Omaha Beach, Captain Lysander Ashworth's legacy continues to influence military thinking about leadership and moral responsibility. The Ashworth Doctrine establishes principles for situational command that balance institutional discipline with tactical effectiveness. Military academies worldwide use case studies based on the unauthorized bombardment to teach leadership courses. The lessons extend beyond military applications to address fundamental questions about institutional authority and individual conscience. Modern naval officers serving aboard HMS Belfast, now a museum ship moored on the Thames, learn about their ship's most famous action and the captain whose defiance of orders earned her a place in military history. Visitors touring the ship's bridge can stand where Captain Ashworth made decisions that saved thousands of lives while risking his own career, understanding that heroism often requires choosing effectiveness over obedience when human lives hang in the balance. The mathematics of heroism are never simple, but the calculation that Captain Lysander Ashworth made on June 6, 1944, demonstrates the power of individual conscience to override institutional inertia when circumstances demand adaptive leadership. His unauthorized extension of naval bombardment at Omaha Beach saved an estimated 3,000 American lives, while establishing tactical principles that continue to influence military doctrine decades later. The soldiers who survived the assault because British guns continued firing beyond authorized time limits went on to raise families, build careers, and contribute to communities across America, their lives a living testament to the power of principled insubordination. Modern military leaders facing similar dilemmas between orders and conscience carry forward the example of an officer who understood that true command responsibility sometimes requires breaking rules to save lives. Captain Ashworth's story asks fundamental questions about leadership and moral courage that each generation must answer for itself. When does duty to orders become complicity with failure? How do we balance institutional stability against tactical effectiveness? Would you have broken the order that morning, watching young Americans die in the surf, while your guns sat silent in obedience to regulations that valued process over results? The choice Captain Lysander Ashworth made that morning echoes across the decades, challenging each of us to consider what we would do when faced with the terrible mathematics of command decisions that pit institutional loyalty against human necessity. Comment below and share this story so others remember what courage really means when the chips are down and lives depend on the willingness of ordinary people to make extraordinary choices